One of the biggest problems in retirement planning, I believe, is what I call retirement self-medicating. That's where people go online, they look up information that sounds interesting and juicy, and they just start spray and pray, making decisions and changing things when it comes to their retirement finances. Rather than doing it from a place with a foundation of comprehension and understanding, this is going to be the second video in a series where we're discussing our peak financial planning, our business financial planning process, and sharing that with the world. This is video module 1, where we're talking about the first step in what we call navigating the retirement risk zone. And this video will talk about how you build your retirement assessment so that you can actually stop self-medicating and make decisions and start to understand what actions you should implement from a place of comprehension and knowing. The first video, if you haven't already watched it, is accessible by going to last week's video. It's called Navigating the Retirement Risk Zone. You can also get access to the entire video series delivered to you week by week to your inbox by submitting an email address on our website through any of the forums there on the website. And we will also deliver you a whole bunch of useful accessories, including free access to our financial planning tool, as well as spreadsheet models and other things that accompany what we show in these videos. Now, in this, we're going to be talking about the retirement risk zone, which we call the missing phase of retirement planning, and you can watch the introductory video to this 5-module course by going to last week's video, or again going to the website, and we'll explain the missing phase of retirement and how to navigate the retirement risk zone. We're going to jump right in today to the first module of our 5 modules, which is called Assessing Your Current Financial Situation. And the idea here is that when you go to the doctor, you would never go to a doctor and accept a prescription right off the bat without them ever taking any diagnostic tests about you. And yet for some reason, we do that all the time with our retirement. And so we're going to show you how we run the diagnostic tests and the fulcrum around which all those diagnostic tests rotate, so that you understand and then can make use of this. And we're going to show this with detailed models. But basically, running the assessment all hinges around this specific item here, which is called your required portfolio income. Your required portfolio income is the central hub around which all other retirement decisions rotate. It is the basic element of your cash flow in retirement. Basically, what required portfolio income allows us to do is it allows us to back out how big a pool of assets you will need at the time you'd like to retire. It will help us identify a target retirement age. It will help you identify a target rate of return, a target savings rate, and a whole bunch of other mathematical metrics that will literally make or break your retirement. Now, with required portfolio income, we can build what's called your control plan. It's like the original health history you have at your doctor, right? Your retirement control plan is all of your original behaviors if you were to change nothing. And it's the financial plan against which you benchmark all your other behaviors so you can tell if you're tracking in the right direction for your retirement. With a baseline or control financial plan in hand, you can now start to identify the gaps and build out your list of action items and quantify and measure how impactful each of those action items actually is. So let's talk about required portfolio income and go through some scenarios. When you retire, you are going to face what is called the income inversion. When you are not retired, you're usually making money and you are spending less than you make, and whatever's left is a surplus and goes into a savings bucket. When you retire, that situation flips. Usually your expenses stay roughly the same as they were when you were working, but your income goes down because now you no longer have salary, and you may or may not have already claimed Social Security or a pension or whatever else, depending on your age. And so what you have is this red bubble here, which is called the gap. And internally, we call that required portfolio income. That is the amount of dollars per year that your portfolio has to be able to provide you in income for you to be able to live for the rest of your life without running out of money. That is what required portfolio income is. And it tells us and allows us to back out a whole bunch of other extremely, extremely important metrics. So what you're able to do with required portfolio income is back out what your required rate of return is on your assets and then make a decision of, is that feasible or not? You also use required portfolio income to generate a Monte Carlo probability of success. And that allows you to ask yourself the question, if my probability of success is 35% or 65%, can I live with that? And again, it illustrates the areas of opportunity. So let's look at how we actually find required portfolio income. We're going to do that through a spreadsheet. So required portfolio income, and I have whole other videos about required portfolio income and how you find this. So if you want more information about that, you can go on the YouTube channel and look up videos titled, When Can I Retire? But required portfolio income is basically the amount of money you need after you factor in your guaranteed income sources. So using this as an example, Let's say you need $63,750 of spending in retirement. Before taxes, you need $75,000 of income. Let's say you have Social Security from spouse 1 and Social Security from spouse 2. You have a pension and an annuity. And these income sources here total up to $53,600. What's left is what's called the gap. And the gap is your required portfolio income. So in this scenario on the screen, this person's required portfolio income is $21,400 per year. Now we can make use of this number to find out a whole bunch of interesting things. So let's say this person needs that $21,400 and they want to retire at 65 and expect to live till 95, resulting in a 30-year retirement. If they were to have all the money they needed on the day they retired and leave it all in cash, they would need $642,000. The reason I'm making that assumption is because if we were to start using rates of return here, now the math gets more complicated, but the principle is the same. Whether you retire and it's all in cash or whether you retire and it's invested, the principle remains the same, which is that the lever around which everything rotates is required portfolio income. And in this scenario here, this person would need $642,000 all in cash on the day they retire in order to take 30 payments of $21,400 per year. Now, let's just do a few tweaks here so you can see how influential this is. Let's say we go up here and we change the amount of expenses and that this individual spends $85,000 per year in retirement instead of $63,750. Well, now their required portfolio income is $46,400. And the total required money on the day one of retirement, instead of being around $640,000, is now $1.4 million just about. You can see just by spending more in retirement, you need more assets on day one. And again, the same principle holds true when you include a rate of return or the fact that it's invested. What happens if we restore this back to where it was and now we change the length of retirement? Let's say instead of retiring at 67 and thinking you're going to live till 97, you decide to retire at 60. What you've effectively done is said, well, I'm going to be retired for longer. Now I need to have a longer retirement timeline. So let's increase this to 37 years of retirement. And now you can see, even with the same required portfolio income, you need a significantly larger pool of assets on the day you retire, about $150,000 more. Needless to say, what the takeaway from this is that you will need to have been a stronger saver or go for an increased rate of return pre-retirement in order to support whatever changes you would like to make to how much you have to spend in retirement or to how long you'd like to be retired, which effectively is just what age you'd like to retire at. Let's take this scenario further. Let's say you're starting with a certain pool of assets at the time you're watching this video. Let's assume you have $300,000 at the time that you're watching this video. You're 58, you want to retire in 7 years at 65. You want to get an understanding of how you use required portfolio income to tell you about what rate of return you need in order to end up with the right size pool of assets on the day you retire. Well, we can use a formula like this for that. We can use required portfolio income to tell us how big the pool of assets is. And now we can tweak a formula like this to figure out what dials we can tune in order to actually end up with this $642,000 we need at the day we retire. So let's say you're saving $15,000 a year. You have 7 years until retirement. Well, assuming all these things, you would need an 8% rate of return in order to get to that $642,000. But let's say you don't have $15,000 per year to save. Maybe you only have $2,500. What rate of return do you require then? You need an 11% rate of return. The idea here is to illustrate that the less you have to save in the years leading up to retirement, the higher rate of return you need to seek. You have to make up for that by taking on more risk with your portfolio. But if you're a stronger and stronger saver, you can take on less and less risk with your actual assets. So let's say you save $25,000 a year. Well, you only need 5% rate of return instead of the prior example where you needed 11. Let's also put this back to normal and say, well, what if you just want to retire earlier? What if you want to retire, you're sick and tired of work and you want to retire, you're 58, you want to retire at 62. So you want to work 4 more years instead of 7. Well, now you can see that if you just continue saving the same way you have been, you need a 17% rate of return. This gives you an idea, right? And we can tell, there are certain truisms around what is possible to achieve as far as rate of return. And we would both all say 17% is just not a realistic rate of return to expect for 4 years in a row without taking on so much risk that it could actually work. You'd have to make up for this by saving substantially more. You can see even going from $15,000 to $25,000 of savings here doesn't help. The idea here is that these are inverse. The more assets you start with, the less savings and rate of return you need if you're closer to your actual required assets at the time of retirement goal. If you have less assets, you need more saving or more rate of return. If you have a smaller savings rate in general and you just don't have substantial cash flow, you're going to need to take on more risk. And now you can make a much more informed decision. And again, all of this is generated by required portfolio income. Now, there's another part I'd like to show here, which is just that using average rates of return is not a good method of planning for retirement. Your required portfolio income will help you determine what the average rate of return you need is for the rest of your life in order to not run out of money. The problem is average rates of return hide things that you need to know about. So let me show you an example of this. I'm going to show you how you have what I would call phased retirement spending. This is a hypothetical client. They have 4 phases of retirement spending, and each of them requires a distinctly different rate of return based on how much they need for the different phases. So in this yellow phase at the top here, this hypothetical person is in their saving years pre-retirement. They have 12 years left to save before they retire. And in order to arrive at retirement's door with enough money to support their required portfolio income until they pass, they need a 5% rate of return roughly during that period of time because they're still contributing to their savings. And then in this green band here, they would be retired and stopped working, but both partners here would have deferred Social Security and not be claiming. So their incomes would go down substantially while their spending would not change markedly. And you can see in this 5-year period here, before they claim Social Security, they need a 7.2% rate of return, a significantly higher risk level in order to achieve that. In this third band, where they're in the bulk or the mainstay of their retirement years, they actually are both claim Social Security. They have all their income sources, their guaranteed income sources coming in the door. Now they only need a 4.7% rate of return, and this is the bulk of their retirement years. And then finally, they have an end-of-life care estimate, and that really inflates how much they need to spend per year in retirement. And they need a 7%, roughly 7% rate of return in this last band of 6 years in order to meet their required portfolio income demands. If we had just looked at their average rate of return across their entire plan, we would see that they need a 5.32% rate of return in order to meet their spending needs. The problem is that the risks are not distributed evenly. We have an early part where they're still saving and they can take less risk. We have a middle part where they're not still saving and they need to take on significantly more risk with their investments. And then we have a third part where they can take on significantly less risk because they have significant savings. And then they have this fourth part where they have to take on significantly more risk once again. And this kind of illustrates how your spending is not linear, and you can and should pay attention to this. So you would have a plan and contingency plans in place in order to address those different bands or phases in retirement. So again, this just shows how using an average rate of return can be extremely destructive. And to just bring all this to a close, the question you have to ask yourself with required portfolio income number in hand, you can now start to ask yourself, are the rates of return that I have to achieve reasonable? Am I saving appropriately to reach my retirement goal? Can I retire at the age I hope or would like to retire? And then you can do what we talked about in part 1 here, which is identify the gaps. Now you can say, well, if I'm not comfortable with all the things I now know, having had this number, what things can I do to improve on this so that if I want to retire earlier, I can, or if I want to spend more in retirement, I can, etc., etc. Now that is what takes us to module 2 in our 5-module system, which is constructing the prescription. And we will be going over that in the next video in this series. So again, if you're not a part of the email sequence, highly encourage you to go to the website, submit your email into any of the forums, and you will get all 5 of these. It's actually a 6-email series, and you will have all the accompanying tools, spreadsheets that we show in the screen here, templates and accompanying instructions to use our financial planning tool and build your own plan along this route. So stay tuned for next week. If you do have any comments or questions, as always, you can leave them in the comments section below the YouTube video. If you're on the email sequence, please send us an email and we'll be happy to address it. As always, thank you for your time and attention. And if you enjoyed what you watched today and would like to schedule some time with us to speak to our fee-only fiduciary financial planning team, you're more than welcome and can do so on our website at www.thepeakfp.com. Thank you for your time and attention. See you in the next video.